Welcome back, guys. I am Follygon, and this is day 30 of Sculptober. That's right, we're already on the second to last day. Today's prompt is Sting, and I'm going to be creating the best Pokemon of all, Bundt, aka Beedrill. But first, if you are new around here, click that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. There you can download some things like my base meshes, brushes, materials, and check out some of my courses. For this one, I am referencing an artwork from Lin Chang, who takes some liberties with the original Beedrill design, but for the most part it stays pretty true. He's still made from these three basic spheres, representing the primary forms for his head, thorax, and abdomen. Then I use a couple tubes of geometry to blend between those. Actually, I say tubes, but it's really just another sphere that I took and stretched and squashed into place to form a tube. I do the exact same thing with the stinger, just another sphere that I pull out, but I specifically use AccuCurve, which is a nice little function that allows you to get that really sharp point on the end there. Then it's off to the arms. I have lately, instead of been using any kind of curve brush to insert a tube of geometry, I've been using spheres a little bit more lately. I just find that for anything with these kind of harder or sharper turns, like these insect-styled legs here, are just a little bit easier to create this way. If you could get some sharper turns in the angle of a curve brush, I might reconsider using that, but as it stands right now, the way curve brushes work in ZBrush, you have to get this kind of fluid shape flowing through your form, so it's really hard to get those sharp angle turns. It's also not that difficult to do. It really only takes a couple seconds to duplicate a sphere, stretch it out, and put it into place, so not really all that complicated. I do the exact same thing for the arm drills, or needles, whatever you want to call those. I think they're supposed to be drills, right? Because his name is Beedrill. But after getting all that stuff into place, it's just a matter of combining the pieces with Dynamesh or some form of Boolean operation. I prefer Dynamesh for quick and dirty combinations, but if I'm going to do something that's a little more precise, something like hard surface polymodeling, then I will use live Boolean for that. It's just a little bit more accurate, and you get a true Boolean when you are using the live Boolean feature. Dynamesh is more of an approximation of combining geometry. Then I start to work on some of the features for the head a little bit more, creating a quick neck, and then moving on to the antenna. I use the exact same technique for the antenna that I used for creating the arm, taking a sphere, squashing it out, and then beginning to duplicate that and get some harder, tighter angles in there, go back through with a slice curve brush, cut up some different sections into some polygroups, which are those different colorful sections that you see there. And then I go through that and start using some polymodeling features to manipulate the form, create a little bit more visual interest, getting some more like taper between some areas, letting it kind of grow or stretch in specific areas around the joints, just trying to make it a bit more visually interesting than a simple tube. And then in the illustration, there was a little bit more form towards the end of the antenna, so I try to represent that a little bit there as well. And then it's just a matter of using things like my move brush to manipulate the object, make sure it's a bit more visually interesting from some of my other angles. So I've talked about this before in some of the past Sculptober videos, but whenever you're working on an object, it's really easy to kind of get tunnel vision and only look at it from a single angle. But after a while, you're going to have to make sure that you're rotating around, looking at it from a lot of different angles, and make sure that that shape is still just as visually interesting and reading nice from every other angle as well. For the eyes, I block in the basic shape with a Damien standard brush, the good old Dam standard, and I just kind of carve this in by hand using Lazy Mouse to get a bit of a smoother, cleaner stroke through there. No shame in using Lazy Mouse, I use it all the time. But just after getting that basic shape in there, I can begin making a quick, dirty selection to begin forming the eye cavity for the head. And then I tried a little bit of an interesting technique here where I tried to repurpose the geometry that I cut from the head for that shape of the eye to try to inflate that and create the eyeball. It gave me some really just nasty geometry that was not very helpful. So I end up just ditching that for now, going back to the head, working on the form a little bit more. You can see me going through with my sharp soft brush to begin creating a bit more of not necessarily an eyelid, but a little bit more of a plane change between the head and the eye socket. Then I go back through with a sphere and just squash it into the general shape of that eye cavity. There is another added benefit of this that I'll talk about a little bit later when I add a hex pattern to the eyeball, but for now, we're gonna move on to adding some color. So for this, I just go ahead and sample the image for a few different areas. Even when you are sampling from a reference image for color, you have to be a little bit careful because there are going to be areas that are a little bit brighter, a little bit more in shadow, depending on what the material is. If it's, super shiny, you might be sampling something that's a lot closer to white than you really want. So typically what I do is I try to find a nice mid-tone. I will sample that from my image, put that on my 3D object, and then begin manipulating that just a little bit to get it feeling a bit closer to where I want it. But after all the basic colors are in place, I can begin working on the overall proportions just a little bit more. There were some more changes that I wanted to make to the back legs, as well as some changes that I wanted to make to the thorax or larger portion of the torso. This piece in particular is not in the original Beedrill design. There are a couple things like that in this piece, like I said, like the antenna are differently shaped, a couple other things with the drills and just the overall proportion of the body. So definitely some differences, but I thought it was a pretty cool take on the character or the Pokemon. So I definitely wanted to implement some of these areas that I felt like were a really cool take on the design. Next up is adding some stripes. For this, there are a couple different techniques that you could go about adding some quick little stripes to a figure. For this specifically, I use the slice curve brush to chop up the geometry. You could polypaint directly on your geo if you want to do that, but honestly, you're going to end up getting some blending between your colors, and that is because polypaint is technically vertex color. So you are not able to assign color to a polygon. You can only assign that color to a vertex. And when you do that, that color actually blends between all the polygons that are touching that singular vertex. So what I do is I chop off all the connected vertices to make sure that the colors don't blend from one area to the other. Then it's on to adding some additional form to the drills. For this, I just use my slice curve brush once again to adjust the connective area between the arm and the drill, and then I go through with a couple different brushes to add some quick texture to the drill. Mainly I use the Damien Standard brush as well as a couple orb crack brushes to just add some quick little details. For the most part though, I keep this pretty simple, pretty quick, and mostly messy. I also go over this at the end with my trim brush just to get a little bit more of a dirty aspect to the sculpt. It was a little hard to see exactly what was going on there though with all the poly paint and that specific material, so I swapped back to my sculpting material, my Follygon clay material, just so I could see a little bit better. After adding all the little scratch marks on the drills, it's time to create some quick wings. For this, I just create a plane of geometry and shape that into the basic form that I needed for a wing. I did this really quick and messy here. Really, I could have spent some more time poly modeling this, but we're trying to move quick, trying to get things done as fast as possible here. So I do that really quick, give it some thickness, and then adjust the shape just a little bit more. And then of course, mirroring it over to the other side is necessary. He's got 2 wings there. Technically 4, I guess, because I have to duplicate this larger wing and shrink it down to create the second set. You'll notice that I'm also using the transpose line. I use that quite a lot. I see a lot of people come in here and asking questions about why do I use the transpose line? Why don't I use the newer 3D gizmo? I've been using ZBrush for a while, and back when I started using ZBrush, there was no 3D gizmo. There was only the transpose line. Plus, there's a lot of really cool kind of hidden features with the transpose line if you're not used to using it that are very helpful. I will put a link on screen to a quick tutorial for those that are interested. So if you remember, I inserted a sphere earlier for the eye that I had to stretch and get into the basic shape for that eye socket. The benefit of that is that compared to the old geometry I was using, to get the hex pattern that I'm using here through ZBrush's noisemaker, it would have been just an absolute pain, but because this sphere already has UVs on it, it's super easy. All I have to do is make sure that the offsets for the X, Y, and Z axis are set up correctly in the noisemaker, and then from there, I can adjust it to exactly where I need it, get the strength, get the direction, everything, and just apply it to the mesh. And it was as easy as that. I also go through and chop off some of the geometry so that my poly count isn't too high there. I also go over it really quick with my smooth brush just to make the texture a little bit more clean and subtle. Then we're off to posing for the final little bit here. This involves just offsetting a couple different areas, making the overall character a little bit more dynamic, twisting the head a little, twisting the abdomen, offsetting the entire character, and overall just trying to make that entire line of action a bit more dynamic. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and check out gumroad.com/Follygon for things like my courses, brushes, and materials. I can't believe we're already done with day 30. That means we only have 1 day left for tomorrow for the final prompt of Sculptober. This month has just flown by. It's been a ton of fun, but I'm gonna be really excited to take a quick break at the end of this just for a little bit so that I can get ready for what comes next, which I'm very excited about, and I hope that you guys are as well. So come on back tomorrow and find out what I'm going to be sculpting for the prompt villain. Hope to see you there.